everyone, and welcome to Completely Booked, the official podcast of the Jacksonville Public Library. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Gabby. Today we are going to chat with Bruce Lipsky. He was a photojournalist for the Florida Times-Union for 35 years until retiring in late 2017. As some of you may know, the main library just inherited the Times-Union editorial archive collection. The collection contains approximately 72,000 clipping files. Each file contains photos and source materials as well as newspaper article clippings. And oftentimes, the source materials behind the articles that appeared in the paper provide far more detail and depth than what was actually published in the paper.
Another huge portion of the collection consists of 35mm negatives that contain one file per day from the years 1979 to 2002. Our special collections team is currently going through the process of cataloging the entire collection, and we've been posting an article each week as a Throwback Thursday on our Facebook and on our Instagram at Jack's Library. Our guest today, Bruce Lipsky, contributed to a large amount of content in the collection, and we thought it would be fascinating to chat with him about his experiences as a photojournalist and what it was like to capture 35 years of Jacksonville's history.
So, without further ado, here is our interview with Bruce Lipsky. So thank you so much, Bruce Lipsky, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became a Florida Times-Union photojournalist?
It's actually a really good story. I was in my final semester at UNF. I was trying to find internships. I was trying to get in at the paper. And at that point, UNF grads weren't really in the newsroom. They weren't looking for them for either internships or hires. But I had been networking a lot. And I had, at that time, was working at a camera store. Was working, like I said, my last semester. My wife's 7 months pregnant. And I'm doing freelance photography at motor races. So I had friends in sports, I had friends in photo. And so they knew me and I was doing things here and there. So I get home late Friday night from working the camera store. My wife is like, she's all excited. I get home, so what's up? She goes, Rocco Morabito is in my intensive care unit. He had had open heart surgery. And Rocco was the winner of the 1968 Pulitzer Prize for his Kiss of Life photo. Really famous photographer nationally, but particularly here. And I said, really? And just then the phone rings and it's a photographer from the paper calling me. Guess what? And I said, I just heard. And he goes, well, not only that, but one of the photographers had been tackled on the sideline at a high school game and had shattered his knee. And they had lost 2 people on the staff in one day. And so everyone, he says, you got to call Ken Paik Monday morning. Well, Ken Paik is the assistant managing editor for News Illustration. So he had photo and layout and so forth are all under him, the art department. And Ken Paik had been my professor in photojournalism at UNF. I said, all right, I'll call Ken. And Ken's a very big, intimidating former Korean Marine that just, the string of profanities was amazing when you talked to him. But anyway, call Ken, hang up the phone. Phone rings again. It's somebody I know from sports. Did you hear? And I said, yeah, I just heard. And this went on till 1 o'clock in the morning. The phone kept ringing. So first thing Monday morning, I called Ken Paik at the paper. I said, Ken, this is Bruce. And I heard you're shorthanded. He goes, I'm not shorthanded, damn it. Be here at 2. And I was there for 35 years.
Wow, what a story.
Tell us a little bit about your photojournalism education and the most valuable pieces of advice you received.
Mine was a little untraditional. There are several well-known photojournalism programs: University of Missouri at Columbia, Western Kentucky, University of Texas in Austin. Now the University of Florida has an excellent photojournalism program, well-known. I was at Florida, was not doing real well at school, and my girlfriend was at Florida State, and she went straight through and came home and said, now, we kind of agreed it was time to come home and get married. So I transferred to UNF, and it took a little while for me to figure out really what I wanted to do. I was still thinking news writing. That's what I had done in high school. That's what I figured I'd do in college, but it just wasn't really clicking. And then I read a book by a man named David Hume Kennerly called Shooter. A friend had it because you're going to want to read this. And I sat down with it and I couldn't put it down. I stayed up all night until I read it. And I went, this is what I want to do. went and talked to my professors at UNF. I said, look, the photo program, one of the things I have to take sculpture and I have to take some other things. I'm like, can I take copy and layout instead and this and that? And UNF was small enough at the time that after bugging them for about 2 weeks straight, the dean of department said, yeah, go do that. We'll make that work. Since they were academic classes, they were okay with it. And so I kind of put my own curriculum together. The story I told you, Paik had been my instructor at UNF, and photojournalism was this one class in the curriculum where most people were interested more in fine arts with photography. So the other people in the class weren't really as interested in as I was. So Paik knew me, and I'd met most of the other photographers on the staff at that point. And so from there, it led into the story that I told you. So it worked out really well in the end, even despite the fact that I didn't go to one of the well-known schools.
And when you were growing up, did you have a passion for photography?
No, what was interesting was my dad had been a photographer in the Navy, and he didn't pursue it after the Navy. But we always had a decent camera in the house. And Dad goes, oh, yeah, photography's simple. You focus and you figure out, how much light for how long. That's it. Aperture, shutter, speed, focus, no big deal. So myself and my brothers, we all knew how to take pictures, but Dad didn't pursue it. So none of us really thought about it. And then I became really, really interested in motor racing, and I started shooting that. I had worked on a couple of pit crews, and I was awful working on the cars and awful during the pit stops, but people liked my pictures, and they would go, well, come on the race, but just don't touch the car anymore. So I figured I would do that. I would be a freelance motorsports photographer. But after I read Shooter, it was like, no, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Can you tell our listeners what exactly a photojournalist is?
Photojournalist is someone who does news photography. It's really capturing the daily. Let me back up. When they talk about newspapers, they talk about how newspapers are the first right of history, and that's kind of what we're doing. We're doing the same thing as a photojournalist. So when you're out and about, particularly in the early '80s compared to now, we're the only people running around with cameras. And we were running around cameras every day. We had photographers on at the paper from 7 o'clock in the morning till about midnight, 7 days a week. And so we're capturing the visual history of Jacksonville. And that's what a photojournalist does in general, particularly if you're at a paper. You're shooting city council meetings, you're going to school board meetings, you're going to sporting events, you're shooting fashion, you're shooting business stories, you're shooting a lot of business stories. And these things it's the news side photography. Instead of it just being all pretty pictures, and we're trying to make nice pictures, while you're there, you have to gather the news when you're out doing it also. So if I take a picture at a fire, it can't say fireman leaves the building. No, it's like, the what, when, who, where, and how has to be there too. So you're combining news and photography.
So you have to be able to take photos and be able to write.
You have to do everything in case there's not a reporter there, because a lot of times the picture will run lines only. You've got to have those things, and you've got to be accurate. If somebody's name is John Smith, you better ask them how to spell John Smith, because it's not going to be what you think it is. But you've got to know where you are, when you were, like I said, the who, what, when, where, how. Just like in a news story, you have to have that in your caption information too. And it has to be accurate.
And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about the Times-Union collection too. It's not just, the clippings from the newspaper. It's the call sheet. Sometimes it's the negatives of the photos. And you just realize how much actually goes into creating one news article. It's not just a writer and a photographer and then it's good to go. Is there anything else about the process that you think readers might not consider when they're viewing the final product?
Yeah, there's a process that goes in it between our editors meeting. The photo department is unique in that we deal with every other news department. So, like I said, news, sports, lifestyle, features, articles, and business. You dealt with all those departments. And our editors were dealing with all of their editors, and all their editors are dealing with their writers. So if a writer goes, for instance, just use a random example, they're going to build the Riverwalk when it didn't exist. One of the business writers would find out, a property owner doesn't want to sell his land that they want for eminent domain to put the Riverwalk across. We're going to go out and interview him. And so his editor calls or comes by the picture desk and says, we're going to do this. We're going to go to this place. We're going to talk to this man or this woman and blah, blah, blah. And that's what we do. And a lot of times we were on our own to those things. So you're trying to make an interesting picture out of somebody with a piece of property or whatever, but there's there's a news element to it. There's a reason it's in the paper.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of your inspirations? Were there any other photojournalists that really inspired you?
Oh yeah. You're always looking at the generation in front of you. And when I came in, everybody wanted to be Mary Ellen Mart, who she has worked on a piece of on homeless kids in the Pacific Northwest, specifically around Seattle, called Streetwise. And everyone wanted to go out and do a story like that. Her book was amazing. William Albert Allard, who's at National Geographic, he had a book called Vanishing Breed, and everyone's like, yeah, I'm going to go shoot cowboys and I'm going to go do all these great things. But Susan Meiselas at the time was working in El Salvador, Nicaragua, both extremely dangerous places to be at that time. And her books on there were just amazing. And these people, Mary Ellen's passed away, but these people continue to work till today. At that time, Annie Leibovitz was young and new and doing all these portraits in Rolling Stone at that point. It hadn't moved over into Vanity Fair. And she was changing how we were all doing portraits. And so, we all started lighting portraits. We all learned how to carry portable light kits and how to light things. And we stood on their shoulders. We built on what they came in and knocked the walls down. And then we went from there.
And after 30 years, you kind of are that established photojournalist you used to look up to now.
I'm sure there's lots of young kids that look to you for inspiration.
I hope, because I remember being at UNF on an assignment where the pottery classes were making these bowls for an annual event in Jacksonville called Empty Bowls. And it's a big fundraiser to help feed homeless and people who are without means. And so I'm taking this one girl's photo and stuff, and I go to get her name and things. She goes, now, who are you? And I said, who I was. And she goes, and what is this for? I said, well, this is for the Times Union. And she goes, well, what's the Times Union? I said, well, it's I guess you're not from here. It's Jacksonville's newspaper. She goes, I'm from Jacksonville. I went, okay. And I was like, she didn't know what the paper was. So that worried me. But I'm on a committee with the North American Nature Photographers Association, and I'm on the college scholarship committee. And every other year they have a giant summit somewhere. And we help pick these college students, about a dozen young men and women who come in and do a project. And then they make a video and so forth for a local nonprofit. When it was here, they did it for North Florida Land Trust. When I worked with those people, it was like I just needed to stay out of their way. They're brilliant young photographers. They're all brilliant scientists, majority of them. In the 2 years since they were here, I think about half of them have finished their PhDs, but they can shoot circles around me. They're just phenomenal photographers.
Along with all of the things you can go see at Special Collections, they also hold quite a few events. So here is our producer, Justin, to tell you a little bit about an upcoming event for all of you true crime fans.
Yes, for those of you who frequent the Dewey Decimal Number 364 in your local library stacks, the Jacksonville Public Library will host a program called Last Words. This event will feature Bob Deckel, the attorney and former University of Florida law professor who served as the lead prosecutor in Ted Bundy's capital murder trial. See and hear him recreate his riveting closing argument that led to the conviction of Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers of the 20th century. This event will occur on Saturday, July 13th at 2 p.m. in the Ansbacher Map Room of the main library. That's Saturday, July 13th at 2 p.m. Now we return to the podcast.
I think it really does take a lot of guts to do what you do. I think, people assume that the Times Union badge and the big camera will kind of automatically just get you in with anyone, but people are not always receptive to questions or especially photos. It can be a tricky thing to navigate.
It's a tricky time now. It's trickier now, I think, than ever. Camera has been a wonderful passport into people's lives. You're always kind of blindsided when suddenly someone in your face and it's like, no, you can't be doing this, and it's usually at something that you're not expecting it at too. The majority of the time we can get in. The press pass will keep you out of more things that'll get you into, but sometimes you have to be a little assertive and explain that you have a right to be here and do this, and you get on with your business.
So what were some of the most notable job assignments that you remember from your career?
Boy, one of my favorites as photographers, we wanted to create a lot of our own content. This one year for Father's Day, I wanted to do a story on a dad's first Father's Day. Things I felt were changing, and the stories about dads were still the same in the paper. And so, dads to me were really involved at that point. I had both our daughters had been born by then. And, I was there through the whole process. And then it's a big part of my job to help raise them too. So I wanted to kind of convey that in the story. And so went to my wife's OB, told her what I wanted to do. And he goes, I got the perfect person for you. So I met this young woman. They're having their first child, and she's a school teacher, and he was an air traffic controller. And she's saying, now you don't actually want to be there when I'm giving birth to you, shaking her head. And I'm just nodding. Yeah, I actually want to be. I want to go with y'all when you buy baby furniture. I want to go with you when you go to your childbirth education classes. We're going to be there. I want to be there when you bring the baby home, yada, yada. So we did all those things. On 2:00 in the morning on my 11th wedding anniversary, I get a phone call. It's time. We go in, and I'm with another woman having a baby on my wedding anniversary. But there's at one point she had decided to have that she needed the epidural. And so the nurse tells me I need to leave the room while they're doing that. And she grabbed the nurse by the arm and goes, where I go, he goes. And so we had developed that relationship, and that always stayed with me. I always build those relationships, be with those people, and that carried me for a lot of years.
That's a great story. And on that note, what were some of the hardest stories to report on?
Hard stories. Every hurricane's hard. We would chase because hurricanes are always an imminent threat to our area. We used to chase them wherever. So when Hurricane Andrew, I was actually off on a camping trip, and I called in when I didn't know that Hurricane Andrew was coming. And I called in and said, look, I know I'm supposed to be on vacation for another few days, but I knew they'd be shipping people off to the hurricane. I said, if you want me to come in and help cover stuff, I will. And he goes, no, we're good. And about an hour later, they called and like, how soon can you leave? And I was like, I wasn't asking to go to the hurricane. I was saying to her, well, a reporter and I drove down to Miami and covered the hurricane, and we got up that next morning. We can't shoot anything at night, really. And the devastation in South Florida was amazing. Things I had never seen. And through a very rough day of shooting, and we were working out of, this reporter and I were working out of the Fort Lauderdale Sun Sentinel, and the other photographer and reporter team were working out of the Miami Herald. At the end of the day, transmit all our pictures in, and they go, okay, look, we got you on a flight 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Turned around, flew out to New Orleans from there, and covered Andrew hitting again. And so that'll wear you out. Doing the same hurricane and getting 2 landfalls in 3 days, that'll wear you out really fast.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but it's hard to see the destruction. It's hard to see where people have lost everything, but you carry on. And then in my last year of the paper, we probably had the worst hurricane that we've ever had here in Irma. I mean, I've never seen 5 feet of standing water in San Marco before, or the statue in Memorial Park virtually underwater. So it was quite devastating to see that here. And now, instead of covering people you don't know in another part of the state or another part of the country, now you're covering your neighbors, your friends and neighbors, and that was very difficult.
And Bruce, how do you think the whole realm of journalism has changed with everybody has a phone in their pocket at all time? How did that kind of alter your role as a photojournalist?
Well, besides everybody holding up in my way when I'm trying to take pictures, it's changed. It's changed everything. When I first started the paper, your assignments, and you'll see on the back of the prints that you have, or the assignment sheets that are attached to negatives, that'd be marked color or black and white. And a lot of assignments were just black and white. Sometimes they're marked both. And so you carried a camera with color and a camera with black and white. You'd go out on assignment, and let's say it was an assignment in the evening on deadline for tomorrow morning's paper, and you had a 10 o'clock deadline. Well, you had to, and this is one of the biggest differences, well, it's going to take me a half hour drive back to the paper. So that's 9:30. It's going to take me 45 minutes to run my color film. So they're backing up. So you're backing up and you're thinking, okay, I've got 15 minutes to shoot once this thing starts. Now you go and you shoot right up to the last second, and you've got your laptop with you, and you download it, you make a quick edit, you crop, you caption, and you transmit the picture in. So you're staying for whole events now, where you would be at a city council meeting, literally for like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and you're hoping to get your picture in that time. The other thing that we had going on then is you had limited real estate. Newspapers, so many column inches that are open for stories and pictures. So you had to try to get it in one picture because you didn't know if there was room for a second picture or for a picture package. Now, yeah, there's one picture in the paper, or maybe there's only one picture with the story on the internet, but then you can do a photo gallery. So you go shoot a football game, even a high school football game on a Friday night, and there's one picture in the paper, but they're expecting to have 20 pictures online. So we can do more. You could do more quicker, but there was a long transformation in there. The other thing that's different now is social media. There was no social media then. And so when you shoot things at you're an event, or let's say you're at a protest, you're trying to get the pictures for the paper and you're trying to get pictures for the internet, but you need to get stuff up on Facebook, you need to get stuff up on Instagram, you need to get stuff on Twitter also. So you're not just shooting with your cameras, you're shooting with your phone too. And where they may or may not want video for the internet, you definitely may want some video for Instagram.
You've already mentioned a whole bunch of books for our listeners, but do you have any tips or book recommendations to get started being a photojournalist?
Boy, there's so much. First off, one of the greatest things to do now is to be listening to podcasts. And there are wonderful podcasts. My favorite is one called The Candid Frame. The young man that does it, whatever type of photography the photographer does, he is totally interested in that for that podcast. And so they don't talk disparaging about other types of photographers or other types of photography. And they talk about that, and they don't talk about gear a lot. A lot of people they're very much into talking about what type of camera, what kind of lens, what kind of flash, how are you using Photoshop, how are you using Lightroom. You want to learn from people, from their experiences and what they're doing and those kinds of influences. Right now, the crop of young photographers out there that are so good, Lindsay Addario, her book is phenomenal. She has a biography type book out right now that's fantastic, but she also has a new photo book that's been out within the last year or so. Some of the people I mentioned now, that there's anthologies of the lifetime of their work. William Albert Allard, David Hume Kennerly has several books at this point, including a whole book of Instagram photos, iPhone photos. Mary Ellen Mark, her work is still out there to be seen. It's still really influential. I'm trying to think. I've bought so many books in the last year. or so. Depending on what you're interested in, there's going to be a kind of book out there for you. But the other thing is, don't always get caught up in photography books. A lot of the photographers I worked with for years and years are voracious readers, and they read on subjects they're interested in. If they're interested in the Middle East, they're reading about that because they want to go to the Middle East and they want to do a story, or they want to do a story locally. You always want to localize a national or an international story. And so people who are interested in that are in tune with what's going on locally. We have lots of photographers who are interested in Cuba. And so they're always staying up with what's going on in Cuba by reading other books and publications. So don't always just read about photography, particularly if you want to be a photojournalist, and make sure you're reading the paper.
Have you kept all of your work over the years, or is there a method of how you store everything?
They've got everything. That you've got everything actually now. That's part of the deal you make with the devil when you work as a staff photographer. They own your work.
Wow.
And so they have everything from when it was negatives through when it was digital. I have lots of copies of things, but my archives are a mess. But now, if you're a young photographer now, you need to be in control of your archive and make sure that you're backing everything up on hard drives and on the cloud, and back it up 3 different ways. But yeah, you've got all my work.
What do you think the importance of preserving the Times-Union archive is?
That really has to be the single best visual history of Jacksonville, particularly for our period. When we were doing it, we didn't realize that I think this was the golden age of photojournalism. When you're looking to about 1980, really from that 20 years, from about 1980 to 2000, we had the budgets to do things, and we did. And you've got a visual archive of how this town changed, how things look. And we had so many people at one time out on the street doing it. And these things, whether it was just simple things where somebody opened a cupcake shop, to hurricanes or the Super Bowl or the Florida-Georgia game. It's probably the best archive of the Florida-Georgia game there is. And we didn't just shoot the game. You shoot the game, you shoot what's going on outside. The last couple of years, I would beg not to shoot the game. Let me just go shoot the tailgaters and the activities outside. Let me shoot the things around the game instead of shooting the game. I'd shot it a lot. Let somebody else shoot the game. But it is so important that has been taken care of, and it's somewhere that eventually, I guess, will be able to be accessed. What I'd love to see is if people are doing academic studies of towns, of the town, of certain parts of either, neighborhoods or certain parts of the history of Jacksonville, that they would go through there and find pictures for their books, because I think it is the single best visual history of Jacksonville.
And our special collections department is going through and cataloging everything right now, which is quite a process, because it's impossible to have a scope of exactly what's in there and how to find a very specific topic, but they stumble upon new things every day. And it really is so cool, because it's so much more than just what was printed in the article too. On the call sheet, it'll have the summary of the story. So kind of the annotated version of what was actually printed. And it's fascinating that we've held on to all of those.
What's fun with it is for me, when I see things, sometimes the pictures were not used really well in the paper. Maybe it was used very small or cropped badly, or it reproduced poorly. And that'll be my last memory of the picture before, the negatives and the pictures went away. And then you see a print and you go, well, that's a lot better than I remember. That's a lot more interesting picture. There's a lot of interesting things in there, because you got to imagine, we used to do, we hated it, but we used to shoot the cook of the week for the Jacksonville Journal. So you're going to people's kitchens and they're cooking a lot of dishes with cream of mushroom soup. Seemed to be a thing every week. But then you have every presidential visit is on there, going back as far as the presidents came to town. and you see how things change and access to the president's changed and how the stagecraft changed. I think there's a picture of President Eisenhower, open Cadillac convertible coming through town. And then if you fast forward 30, 40 years, I figure I photographed. You don't ever say shot the president. You say photographed the president, George H.W. Bush. And he came into a airplane hangar, a very limited audience, invited audience. And then Air Force One is behind him as a prop, whereas before people are like right up to the car. And so you can see how things have changed over time. Like I said, including the stagecraft.
Throughout your whole photojournalism career, it seems like you have to travel a lot with a camera. So do you have a favorite camera, one that became like your baby?
I had one that was stolen that I was upset about. I used to call Pee-wee because I had in the old days on the back of the camera was a door. There wasn't a LCD screen. So you had on that door a little holder for the film box, the tab off of it, because you had to see if you're carrying multiple cameras. I may have a Tri-X, a 400, back then ASA, black and white film in one camera, and a 64 ASA slide film in the other camera. But it was interesting as things changed. In the beginning at the paper, we were, when I got there, I think we were always shot Nikon. A couple of guys shot Canon. I was happy with that. And camera we used for a very long time were Nikon F3s. And I always felt like if somebody came up to me and tried to take my camera or stop me, I could whack them with that camera. It was such a heavy piece of metal. By the end, their cameras were much bigger, actually. The Nikon D2Xs or D3Xs or whatever were big, but they're lighter, titanium and plastic. And if you hit somebody with the camera, it's going to burst into a million pieces. But I have on my Nikons through the years. Most of them don't work at this point. They've been literally used to death. But don't have a real favorite. Trying to think, there's got to be a favorite one in there somewhere. I still have my first camera, my first SLR, which was a Minolta SRT 101. I think you can find those for $5 in thrift shops now. And that was like $300 back then, which was a lot of money. But it's so small and simple compared to what we ended up with.
And since you've retired, have you really put the camera down, or do you still continue to take pictures every day? I'm
trying to figure what I want to do. They're around, just got back from Yellowstone, and I shot a lot in Yellowstone. I also found out how dirty my sensors were when I was trying to process some of the things from just sitting around. They got dirty. Trying to figure what I want to do. They're sitting around a lot more than they should. They're getting dusty where they never had time to get dusty. They had a lot of time to get dirty, but they were, always in the car, always going somewhere. We used to laugh. My daughters are both school teachers. People always talk about how well behaved your daughters are. And I said, well, they never knew where dad was going to show up, and he had cameras. And so, it was like, we were always out there, always. Even I remember when we bought Jesse stroller, I wanted a stroller that had a place for my camera bag in the back. If we were going somewhere, we we're going to stick that bag in there too. I forget what the question was. I'm sorry.
Do you still take photos every day?
Oh yeah, I do probably a lot more with my phone right now, like everyone else does. Everything's ready to go. Everything's charged up. Like I said, they're a mess, but they're ready to go.
And looking back on your career, what do you think the most gratifying part of being a photojournalist is?
It's funny when you get into it, you so want to be a photographer. And it's one of the few fields where you get to shoot every day. If you're a commercial photographer, you're spending a lot of time trying to get clients and customers and doing the business part. If you're a wedding photographer, it's the same thing. You're shooting on Saturdays and Sundays. You're doing a lot of film processing during the week. You're meeting with clients and so forth. But as a photojournalist at a newspaper, you're shooting 5, 6, 7 days a week. And at first you think that's what you want to do. But in the end, it's the people you meet. It's really interesting. And it's been the hardest part about not being at the paper every day is not meeting someone new. You think it's going to be really neat. You're going to shoot this celebrity or that celebrity. But celebrities aren't a lot of fun to shoot. When you get to go up on the drawbridge and shoot the guy that works the bridge, or you meet had it at NAS. There was a change of command ceremony for regional command, the Navy command. Well, the admiral was a woman who was barely 5 feet tall. I doubt she was 5 feet tall. And she was the most interesting person and dynamic. I mean, you shook her hand and you just like felt the electricity. And so it's like just the people you get to meet, the things, all the behind the scenes things you go to. When you go to out on the west side, I forget exactly where it is, where they make bottles for Budweiser, and you're watching molten glass fly by you at 100 miles an hour. That becomes, glass bottles and stuff. That's a lot of fun to do all that.
Seems like a really fascinating career.
It can be. There's some boring stuff. You sit in the courthouse a lot. You sit in city council meetings a lot. You sit in school board meetings a lot. But there's a lot of stuff to balance it out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Bruce. We really appreciate you kind of opening up your experiences.
Yeah, and I look forward to see what you do in the future.
Well, thank you.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Completely Booked this week. We hope you enjoyed hearing Bruce's stories about his career as a Times-Union photojournalist.
You can view articles from the Times-Union archive upon request in special collections if you have a specific project you're working on and think there's a useful article tucked in the archive.
You can also discover a wide array of historical content in special collections, both local and abroad, on the 4th floor of the main library. And there are plenty of books on journalism and photography in the library if you're interested in learning more about those subjects.
Tune in to Completely Booked next week. We sit down with Sean Norton, manager of the Bill Brinton Murray Hill branch, to kick off Graphic Novels Month. He gives us his personal recommendations and tells us about the process that goes into creating a graphic novel.
Until next time, I'm Gabby.
And I'm Amanda. Bye, guys.